It's no secret that in the past, Square Enix has struggled with game engines, but none more notorious than that of Crystal Tools, a game engine which caused numerous problems for Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy Versus 13, and Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. Basically, everything that was ever built on Crystal Tools had problems. So you would think that Square Enix learned their lesson. They would no longer utilize the proprietary engines that caused them so much pain that previous generation. Well, actually, they would, in the form of Final Fantasy XV, and now Forspoken's Luminous Engine. Now, it's worth clarifying that Luminous Engine was nowhere near the disaster that Crystal Tools was. Now, this doesn't mean that Final Fantasy XV had smooth development. Far from it. I mean, far from it even before they started using Luminous, but that's beside the point. From Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn onward, it would ditch 1.0's Crystal Tools, and would take a version of Luminous Engine that was already in development. Yoshida and his team would then customize this engine and retool it to their own liking. The end result is that the Final Fantasy XIV that we all now know and love runs on its own heavily modified version of Luminous, which at this point is virtually its own engine separate from the main branch of Luminous. More recent Square Enix titles like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Dragon Quest XI utilize Unreal Engine 4 and have seemingly had a lot smoother development, minus some external issues. And with future games in both the Remake series and Dragon Quest XII also being developed on Unreal Engine 5, it all begs the question, what engine will Final Fantasy XVI run on? Many people are speculating that yet again, this will be another Unreal Engine game, but actually, and call it just a hunch, but I don't think it's going to be an Unreal Engine game. Normally, when an Unreal Engine 4 game is announced, it is absolutely no secret. When Final Fantasy VII Remake was first announced, one of the first details we even found out about the game was that it was running on Unreal Engine 4. Dragon Quest XII is a game that was announced, and we know absolutely nothing about it. Oh yeah, except for the fact that it's going to be running on Unreal Engine 5. And this isn't a coincidence. In fact, it's part of Epic's agreement that you have to be transparent about using Unreal Engine in these games. And it's something they do, intelligently, for marketing purposes. While again, this doesn't hard confirm that the game is definitely not using Unreal Engine, it does seem significantly less likely with the terms and conditions and the patterns associated with them. So if it isn't Unreal Engine, what engine could they possibly be using? The resurrection of Crystal Tools, baby, let's go. No, but in all seriousness, it does seem to be as if it could be a proprietary engine within Square. Either something they've created for this game, or an engine that they previously used. Meaning that one of those possibilities is the Luminous engine. Now, before you begin booing, it seems like they've made a lot of progress on it. Forspoken is looking phenomenal right now. Whenever I look at this game's magic system, it's something that truly does look next gen. From what we've seen so far, it really is an impressive game. However, even still, I don't think this team is using Luminous engine. Final Fantasy XVI has been in development for some form now for about 5 years. Around that time, Final Fantasy XV was finishing development. It would seem strange to me if after a troubled development cycle like the one Final Fantasy XV went through, that they would turn around and use the same game engine again, and also have two massive games working off of it, that being Forspoken and Final Fantasy XVI. Instead, I think something else might be going on here. I think that they're actually using Final Fantasy XIV's engine for Final Fantasy XVI. While that may sound crazy, hear me out. Using new game engines is expensive, primarily because you actually have to train all of your staff in order to use that new engine before you can even begin to make a video game. So what would be one of the most affordable things that Creative Business Unit 3 could do? Utilize an engine that they're already familiar with, and make the necessary improvements to that engine so that it can support increased graphical fidelity. It also might, and I emphasize might as it heavily depends on how the engine is engineered, but it's possible some of these new graphical graphical features could be backwards implemented into Final Fantasy XIV, allowing for the game's inevitable graphical refresh. And so with it being more cost-effective, more time-effective, and potentially even beneficial to Final Fantasy XIV, yet again, saving more time and money, it just seems to make the most amount of sense to me. It's worth noting again that Final Fantasy XIV's engine is an offshoot of Luminous engine. It actually broke off from Luminous at an early point in development, and was modified and retooled specifically for Final Fantasy XIV. At this point, I imagine it's quite different than that of the main Luminous engine, and if this is the case, it's interesting to see how it would have evolved into its own thing. Games like Final Fantasy XV Windows Edition and Forspoken shows us just how beautiful Luminous can be when its shackles are off. That being said, that version of the engine and this version of the engine split off at a very different point, and so it's hard to say how it will actually shape up. But all of this is just my theory on what could happen. So Ultima, I want to hear from you. What engine do you think Final Fantasy XVI is running on? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you value the content on this channel, consider becoming a patron like Amber Loringer, who helps keep the channel going and growing. Link in the description below.